Now, I'm going to just set the scene with some general points. We've been saying in the run-up to this meeting that its purpose is not to repeat all over again the many strong arguments for cancelling the Silvertown Tunnel project. We want to focus today on actions we can take to stop it. But I'm just going to remind you very, very briefly of what the arguments are that we've been making in the coalition over the past few years, and indeed previous campaigns were making, going right back to must be 10 years now. 2012 the first campaigning started against this. First, the tunnel's part of a car-centred transport policy. More roads produce more traffic, and this project will do that, as all previous road projects have. The Greater London Authority says it will limit the amount of traffic going through the tunnel with a charging scheme. We know that that didn't work at the Dartford crossing. And secondly, we've got legal advice that a future mayor could remove the toll under political pressure, which is exactly what we're seeing in Merseyside now with the new crossing at Widnes. The political pressure is coming on to remove the toll. The second point is that if this awful tunnel was built, it would exacerbate London's already drastic pollution problem, and that would especially impact the borough of Newham. So the city's most deprived and disadvantaged communities, the communities of colour, would get more pollution, and the project would benefit only the haulage companies, the people with subsidised parking spaces at Canary Wharf, and those flying in and out of City Airport. Third point, the tunnel and this car-centred transport policy will contribute to climate change and make it impossible for London to meet its climate targets. 2 years ago, our coalition, together with the Transport Action Network and our dear supporters in Extinction Rebellion Greenwich and Speak Out Woolwich, published together research showing that Transport for London's traffic projections that it used to plan the tunnel envisaged greenhouse gas emissions from London's transport sector far greater than those in London's own climate targets, and that even those targets were far off the targets worked out by the Tyndall Centre on the basis of climate science. Now, last week, the Mayor announced some new climate targets, actually much more stringent, and that's a move in the right direction. In terms of transport, the Mayor has said that the volume of traffic should go down by 27% by 2030. And in fact, in the underlying documentation, there's another scenario which envisages a 40% cut in traffic volumes by 2030. But the tunnel project moves exactly in the opposite direction. Worse still, other car-centred policies, such as suspending the congestion charge in the evening, have been adopted, and many of the public transport projects that were planned at the same time as this tunnel have been postponed or cancelled. Bakerloo line to Lewisham, anyone? The whole transport policy is going in the wrong direction, and we aim to change that. Now, the final point from me is about time. We're often asked whether we think the tunnel project can still be stopped. The preparatory work, anyone who's been down to the peninsula can see, or indeed on the other side by the Royal Docks, you can see that the work has begun. The answer is, until the boring machine that's being brought from Germany is in 27 different pieces, until that is, all the pieces are here, and until they're reassembled on site, we can stop the tunnel. And in fact, during the pandemic, we had our Zoom calls, and we had friends who were involved in road protests in the 1990s who specifically made the point. These things are not only stopped at the 11th hour, they can be stopped at the 11th hour, 59th minute. So we kind of are at the 11th hour, but we think there's 3 months before that boring machine is put together, and it's entirely realistic to speak about stopping the tunnel. Now, our organising group has many actions planned, but the point of this session today is not for us to come and tell you what we think you should do. The point is for us to share a whole range of different ideas. We have labelled the week beginning Sunday the 20th of February, so going up to Saturday the 26th of February, as a time where we want to stage a week of action against the tunnel. But it's really up to everybody here, the many different organisations that are supporting our coalition, to decide what they want to do in that time slot. but also all other time slots. So I'm going to move on to the opening panel. As I told you, it's going to be in 4 bits. There'll be limited time for questions and so on after each of those bits. So we'll take, and then after that, we'll split into the breakout groups. That could be a hairy moment technologically. 4 of those groups will be meeting here at the Action Centre, and 3 of them on community action, political action, and trade union workplace action will also meet online, and our technical friends here will set that up so you can join breakout groups in Zoom in the usual way. And I mean, we all know that's a bit constrained, but that's the world we live in. So I'm going to bring in the speakers. On the political aspect, we've got 4 very good speakers, all of whom have done an enormous amount in terms of opposing this tunnel, and indeed on social and environmental issues generally. So first, I've got Sian Berry, and is Sian with us? When I look round, it means I'm looking.
Yes, she is. Hang on.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to ask each of the speakers a question, and Sian, the question to you. So Sian is a member of the London Assembly, known, I'm sure, to most of you, and of the Green Party. Sian, we'd like you to give us an update on the efforts at City Hall to get the Silvertown Tunnel project cancelled or paused for review, and tell us what you think can still be done given the limited time. And also, do you think the legal advice we have on the potential for future mayors to cancel the charge can make a difference? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you for having me today in such an interesting format. I'm really pleased to see you doing hybrid. So yeah, I'm Sian Berry. I'm a Green Assembly member. I work in City Hall as an Assembly member where I directly challenge the mayor. And it's really clear that the power over the decisions on the tunnel going forwards are with Sadiq Khan and the GLA. In 2008, Boris Johnson, a previous mayor, inherited a similar project, the Thames Gateway Bridge, from Ken Livingstone, and he was able to cancel that project, even though it was quite well advanced down the line. This is a decision that the current mayor could make. He could cancel it. And I think, you know, one of the things we can do politically is keep creating the growing opposition that there is amongst Labour politicians locally. Labour politicians within the GLA need persuading as well, and other speakers will talk about that. So what I've done in City Hall, obviously I was a road campaigner before I was an Assembly member. I've been opposing this scheme since 2013, but I've been an Assembly member since 2016. And in City Hall, we've spent time challenging the current mayor not to progress this project. And what he did in 2019 was sign a contract to have it built with a company called, well, a consortium called Riverlinks. And we warned him, me and the Liberal Democrats in the Assembly, we warned him not to sign this contract, because at that point, cancelling the scheme doesn't save money, it costs money, because you've signed a contract with a contractor who will need to be compensated for having that contract cancelled. So since that, he did that a few months before the planned 2020 London elections. And that was one of the reasons we told him not to do it. We said, don't lock in the next mayor into this expensive contract, which will clearly cost hundreds of millions of pounds to cancel. But he did it anyway. We went ahead with the election. He is still the mayor, sadly. But now the decision lies with him, and it is a decision that costs money. Now, he argues that it will not cost as much to go ahead with the scheme. And what he's doing there is something completely wrong. He is saying that going ahead with the scheme won't cost money, because the money to pay the contractor will come from tolls that he will place not only on the Silvertown tunnel but also on the Blackwall tunnel. And therefore it's a PFI scheme, the money disappears, it doesn't cost Londoners anything. But I think that's the wrong way to look at it. This is still an overall liability to Londoners. And Simon mentioned the legal advice that his team have got, and that legal advice is perfectly clear that the mayor has the power, as he has to cancel the scheme. He also has the power, or the future mayors have the power, to cancel those tolls. And this becomes even more complicated by the fact that he's now announced that he wants to do something in future, which is something I've argued for a very long time, which is wider per mile road charging, where a single toll on a single bridge or tunnel would create a huge complication within a scheme like that. So he now has this further problem to deal with. We also argue that the cost of cancellation, which we don't have a figure for, and I'll talk about that in a second, is hundreds of millions of pounds. But the cost of building this scheme, the amount we've committed to give in the toll money to the contractors, is about £2.5 billion. And that rises all the time with inflation, because it's written into the contract that it will rise with inflation. So this is the comparison needs to be between hundreds of millions to cancel it and £2.5 billion to build it, because that is the overall cost to Londoners, to the public. He's not listening on this measure at the moment. However, what we do have within the London Assembly is we have a power to amend the mayor's budget, to change the mayor's policies. If we vote within the Assembly with a 2/3 majority, we can change his policies. And I am currently in a battle with the mayor within City Hall to get a figure we can use in public to use in an amendment to the mayor's budget to cancel the scheme. And he will not release this figure. Now, I've argued, and I'll put the link to the video you can watch after this, carry on watching the speakers, of me arguing with the mayor about how it is anti-democratic not to give us a figure that we can use to exercise our powers. I can see the notice, thank you, that I can use to use our powers with the London Assembly to be able to amend the mayor's budget. I think he is fettering our powers over him, and it's anti-democratic. We've got the first budget meeting this week. There are two budget meetings where we can amend the draft budget and then the final budget. In the draft budget meeting, we don't have this figure. So in the draft budget meeting, we're going to try and get the Assembly members to vote to require the mayor to release a figure we can use for what the cancellation costs of the Silvertown tunnel are. So this is a genuine political opportunity. And I would really like people from all over London to be writing into their Assembly members asking for them to require the mayor to release this number. This is a moment where we can really force the hand of the Assembly. We've got many, many Labour members who've got many constituents who do not want this tunnel to go ahead. And the more pressure you can put on them, the better. So please write to your Assembly members. Please pay attention to what happens next in the budget process. And please keep an eye on how anti-democratic Sadiq Khan is being about this. This tunnel's a terrible idea. He's not listening, but actually he's elected by us and he needs to listen. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sian. That's great. I'm going to get my piece of paper. There you are. All the simplest technologies go wrong. The next speaker is going to be technologically simpler because he's here. David Gardner, Greenwich councillor, Labour, who's a long-standing opponent of the tunnel. And David, what I want, and by the way, like all speakers who are here, if you come and stand behind this chair, then everybody online will be able to see you. David, please tell us what has and has not been done at Greenwich Council level to stop this project going ahead, and how you think our campaign could influence things in Greenwich from here onwards, given the limited time we have. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. So, yes, so in 4 minutes. So I think Greenwich in particular has a legacy of 1970s thinking. So the ambition for another tunnel or bridge has long been there. There was that old agenda, if you like, of new roads equals more growth, equals more jobs. And that had the support of key businesses. and obviously it was augmented by all the hold-ups and so forth that you had on the Blackwall Tunnel. So in 2012, the then Labour Council ran a campaign, Bridge the Gap, and everyone was lined up to say they wanted this new Silvertown tunnel. Some of us actually always opposed it, you know, and that has grown and grown within Labour circles, and obviously well beyond Labour circles. In 2015, there was a change with a new council. There was a change of emphasis, and support then became far more nuanced on evidence that it would actually lead to an improvement in air quality and would reduce traffic and would come with strong mitigation measures, none of which we have actually seen either in terms of the evidence that TfL put forward themselves or indeed quite the mitigation measures. Then there was further pressure. Obviously, then you had the climate emergency, and in 2019, the Greenwich Labour Group, this is all in the public record, came out saying that the plans for the tunnel should be paused and reviewed because of the climate emergency and because of the poor mitigation. So that became the Labour Group policy, but never formally went through the council procedures. So the campaign has continued. Obviously, the climate emergency, Greenwich as a council is committed to a very ambitious 2030 target for net zero, including a 45% reduction in vehicular traffic by 2030 in 8 years' time. How you could do that with the Silvertown tunnel, that's a big, big question. And then, so this year, what we have done, I was deputy leader then, but now on the scrutiny panel, what we have done on scrutiny is actually try to hold TfL to account. And at scrutiny in December, on the 9th of December, and many of you were there, we actually had TfL in. We held them to account, their project lead for the Silvertown tunnel, and we heard, well, there isn't watertight legal. It's not waterproof that you cannot reduce tolls in the future. They couldn't answer the questions in terms of the modelling, and they couldn't answer the questions in terms of the big issue for us, which is 4 into 2 doesn't go in terms of the southbound traffic and the impact that that has. So we said again, as a scrutiny panel, we said we call on the council to call for a pause and review, and we call on Greenwich Council to cooperate with the other councils, Lewisham and Hackney and Newham and so forth, to get formal legal advice on whether a future mayor or the current mayor could actually reduce tolls or indeed eliminate tolls, which would blow the whole pretense of it being neutral in terms of traffic and air quality in the air. So that came from scrutiny. That's now got to go to overview and scrutiny soon, and then half a minute left, thank you, and then hopefully that will go to full council. So in terms of what needs to be done, well, we've got local elections coming up. Clearly, there's a big issue in the doorstep along the route, right down to Eltham, where 4 into 2 really, really affects Eltham, Kidbrooke, as well as Blackheath, Greenwich, Charlton, and so forth. We've really got to keep up the pressure with local elections, and we've got to continue to campaign. We probably need to think a bit beyond that as well, which we'll come to later. But at the moment, I think it is keeping up the pressure for that pause and review to look actually, is this the right policy going forward, given the huge impact it will have in inducing traffic and the gridlock it will mean throughout Greenwich and indeed north of the river, which I know is another issue. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Now, the next person I hope is Jon Burke. Are you there, Jon? Yep. Fantastic. Jon Burke is a former senior councillor in Hackney and also in the Labour Party. Jon, question to you. You've worked in City Hall and you've served as a councillor, including as the head of transport in Hackney. What do you think are the political pinch points we should be pushing at to get the tunnel cancelled? Thanks.
So I think the other speakers have covered some good ground, and I'm sure we'd all love a lot of time to get into the weeds of this issue. And sadly, I only have kind of 4 minutes, so I'll try and speak directly to the question, which is kind of, what are the political levers that can be used at this stage to help influence the process and produce the result that everybody in this room virtually and otherwise would like to see. I think Sian is correct that Assembly members have a key role in scrutinising this process and potentially a key role in helping to veto the Mayor of London's budget by a 2/3 majority, although historically that's never happened and proved very difficult to try and achieve when I was the chief researcher to the Labour group at the London Assembly. And so the prospect of that, I think, is improbable but not impossible, therefore should be pursued, but we shouldn't solely rely on that. I think we need to ask ourselves where we are in the political cycle at this juncture, and understand that we're approaching May local elections in all of the affected boroughs. Many of the candidates for the parties that are likely to be leading those boroughs after the May elections, whether under a directly elected mayor or a council leader, have already been selected, and therefore the opportunities to ensure that candidates who are opposed to the tunnel were selected have now been missed. But that doesn't mean to say that this group can't approach all declared candidates in the wards across the 7 boroughs that this is likely to affect, particularly in those wards that are geographically closest to the major effects of the tunnel, whether that be in Greenwich itself or right throughout East London, where some of the most impoverished communities that are already afflicted by appalling air quality and congestion live. And this campaign and other local residents should be approaching those candidates to ask them whether or not they're willing to, in the event of being elected, vociferously oppose the Silvertown tunnel. Now, obviously, that puts us beyond the deadline to which I think Simon referred earlier, a 3-month deadline, because the elections are in May. But that work could begin now, and at the very least, it could be an opportunity to glean information about which candidates are willing to vociferously oppose the tunnel. A5 leaflets through the doors of everybody's houses in those wards are very cheap and a very effective measure and an important tool in a democracy for ensuring that when people go to the polls in May, that they're aware of the candidates who are willing to make the difficult decision to oppose a tunnel that has a huge amount of momentum behind it. Everybody who has an interest politically or financially in this tunnel believes that this is a done deal, and therefore politically opposing it, might come with some jeopardy for, I think, councillors. But I think that the people who oppose it, who will put themselves forward for election, should be able to rely on the support of this group, and therefore, the people within this group should be willing to state to the public in those wards which candidates oppose the Silvertown tunnel and are willing to do so vociferously in council, and even as part of their campaign, and which candidates support it, and allow the public to make their mind up. And I think if you were to speak to the majority of residents in those wards that are likely to be most affected by the Silvertown tunnel, I think they'd want to back people who were going to put the interests of their own health and their children's health first. So I think that is the lever that I'd be seeking to use at this stage. I think I'd just make a final point. I'm very conscious of time. The 6th carbon budget states very clearly that the UK by 2050 needs to reduce the number of miles driven on its road by 17%, and that's on the balanced decarbonisation pathway. That is a huge undertaking without precedent in British or even international history, but one that we must achieve even with a fully electrified land transport sector. In London, that means reducing the number of miles driven on our roads by almost 3.8 billion annually. We will not achieve that by building additional road infrastructure, including tunnels such as the Silvertown tunnel. What we ought to be doing is seeking opportunities to remove road infrastructure and reverse the induced demand that has occurred in London since the end of the Second World War, because that is the only way we will play a full role in reducing surface transport emissions and averting an environmental catastrophe. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Next, last in this segment, by no means least, we've got Camille Barbagallo of the COP26 Coalition, which was the organization that brought together all the campaign groups that focused their efforts on the COP26 talks in Glasgow. Camille's joining us online. Camille, please tell us what the coalition achieved, what it could not achieve around the climate talks, and what you hope can be done to build action for climate and social justice this year, and how our campaign could fit into that broader picture. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Simon, and what a fantastic turnout to see everyone here on a Saturday morning. And so I thank you for the invitation. As Simon said, my name's Camille, and I've been working for the COP26 Coalition for the last 2 years. And in answer to what we were able to achieve around the talks, I hope that lots of people participated in and also joined the mass mobilizations that we built on November the 6th. What we saw in Glasgow was both an incredible show of solidarity and mass turnout. We were able to mobilize upwards of around 150,000 people on the streets of Glasgow to send a really clear message to those who were inside of the negotiations. And because of COVID, and also because of a commitment to local organising, we also built local hubs across the UK in the lead up to November the 6th. We built about 51 local hubs who managed to turn out another kind of 100,000 people across the UK. So on November the 6th, across the whole of this country, we saw around 250,000 people take to the streets under a really explicit messaging around climate justice. And so whilst I think, and most folks who were involved in the COP process, that the COP negotiations were a failure, and they were a failure because of they fall down on the sides of the interests of big business, fossil fuel companies, and those that are profiting from the climate crisis. What I think we can say was a success was learning how to organize during a global pandemic, having the confidence to call people out onto the streets, having a COVID policy that was better than the UK government, but that wouldn't be hard because they're just such a shambles. And so we did it safely. And we, I think, shifted the Overton window around what it means to be campaigning on the climate crisis. And by that, I mean that we have to have an understanding of climate justice, and we have to have a systemic and structural understanding of the problems that we face. And it also means that we need to understand how our struggles, whether it's fighting for better wages and conditions at work, whether it's fighting against police violence, whether it's fighting against gendered violence on our streets, how all of these struggles are connected to the ecological problems that we face. And they're connected because they're driven by the same system. And so we don't need to drag everyone into just one campaign. There's no magic silver bullet that solves the climate crisis. In fact, we need to understand how our struggles are connected. And so campaigns like the Silvertown Tunnel, I think, are also incredibly important. They're the bricks and mortar of the climate justice movement going forward. I would say also in London, the Incinerator campaign in North London is another example of the kinds of local campaigns that are, I think, the red thread, shall we say, that runs through how we can link together our community campaigns with a whole variety of other struggles. And I know from talking with Simon and other campaigners involved in the Silvertown Tunnel that there's already that kind of awareness and understanding of the kind of interconnected issues that are at play. It's not just about roads, is it? It's also about air quality and safety. It's also about who is invested in London and who is disinvested in London, and which communities are being abandoned and why they're being abandoned. Usually has something to do with race and racism and class and all of those kind of questions. So going forward, we need to, I think, continue the work of the coalition. The COP circus has left town. We're actually still the president for the next year, so you should bash on Alok Sharma as much as you possibly can, because there's gold in them hills in terms of we stopped Cambo, right? In terms of, and we did that because we bashed and bashed and bashed them for the entire time that they were in the lead up to COP26, and we can do it again with the Silvertown Tunnel. So whilst with all due respect to the previous speakers, there is an electoral strategy. I think there is also a strategy for direct action and for taking these matters into our own hands, because time and time again, those who currently have the power are not prepared to act in our interests. And we've got to work out ways to make them act in our interests. So mass mobilization, targeted direct actions, and keeping up the pressure on a whole variety of different ways of thinking about who has power in this situation. The investors, I'm sure that machinery has to get here somewhere, and all in that kind of way. Next week, I'm going to put some details in the chat. Next week, we're holding an all coalition meeting so that we can start the process of deciding how we go forward. And there's also a local hubs meeting in February. Thanks very much, everyone. Good luck.
So thanks very much, Camille. I'm actually a really nice person, so don't take the sign that says please stop the wrong way, please. It's just because of this format, which the university couldn't crack, I remind you. So we've got a few, take pity on your poor chairman, don't ask too many questions or make too many points, because we've got to keep on with our brilliant speakers. But if there are any questions, we've all noted the very, very practical things that John and David and Sian and Camille proposed. We can come back to those in the breakout groups, the final session. But if there's any questions, the floor is open. We're going to move on. Thanks very much, everybody. We're going to talk about now trade union and workplace action and how that fits into this. I'm hoping, first of all, that we have online with us Steve Hedley. Is he there?
You do indeed, yeah, I'm here.
Right, okay, we've got him. He's the Senior Assistant General Secretary of the RMT, the Transport Union. He's also a Newham Trade Union Council. Steve, please tell us why trade unionists in the public transport sector are opposing this Silvertown Tunnel project, and about the potential for investment in public transport as an alternative to a transport policy centered on roads and cars. And please tell us how, as a community-based coalition, we could strengthen our links with those trade unionists. Thank you.
Okay, so if I just set the background, we have a so-called Labour mayor in Cttee who's about to butcher public transport in London. And of course, Cttee will try to wash his hands of the whole matter and say, well, it's all because of national government. And there is an element of truth in that, and the national government are cutting the subsidies for transport for London. But instead of forming a bloc with the trade unionists and workers and commuters, Cttee is intending to impose cuts on pensions, cuts in jobs, and the demolition of terms and conditions, which is a completely wrong thing. I mean, to be quite honest, I'll never vote for the man again. But we have this ridiculous situation where there's even talk of mass cuts to services on buses and trains and tubes. So all these things will drive people away from public transport. which is the greenest form of transport. And just to give you some of the flavour of what's going on here, we have managers who've been promised £12 million in bonuses for carrying out these cuts. So there's £12 billion there. Sorry, 12 million, just for people who can wield the axe most efficiently within TfL, which is an absolute disgrace from anybody who claims to be a Labour mayor. But the driving people away from public transport with less services obviously drives people towards the roads. And to add insult to injury, we're told we have no money for TfL, but we have 2 billion, 2.5 billion, and it's probably going to be in excess of £3 billion when this Silvertown project is completed, the Silvertown tunnel, which will bring pollution right into my area. And this isn't, I acknowledge there are probably a higher percentage of ethnic minorities in our borough, but it's a class question. It's an absolute class question. Because people in Newham, we've all got one thing in common. 99.9% of us are working class people. And the reality is that it's a soft target, because if this was to be brought into some middle class borough somewhere, the middle classes would be outraged and out campaigning. And they hope that that's not going to happen here in Newham, but they hope that both sides of the tunnel, there's not going to be the opposition to this that there would be in our places. And that's where we as trade unionists really need to step up. And what can we do about it? Well, ultimately, we can campaign, we can awareness raise. I'm very inspired by people from the direct action movements, the Insulate Britain, and the Extinction Rebellion people, because they're doing more than actually just spouting hot air. Because what they're doing actually is putting costs on the projects and bringing back detrimental public opinion back to projects that are polluting the environment. And anything we can do as a trade union to help these direct action movements, we will do. And ultimately, what I'd like to say is that we've been able to take industrial action to stop these. That I don't think that would be possible at the minute, but I don't think it would be impossible to build the consciousness of workers to actually challenge these projects. We had in the 1970s, actually, building workers in Australia putting on building bans from refusing to build projects that actually damage the environment. The Australian Builders Federation, way ahead of its time, actually challenged these polluting projects and things that destroy the environment. And I think with the consciousness that has grown over the past few years, I think it's not impossible to ask British workers to do the same, to take action against projects which pollute the environment and are an attack on the working class. Our children are going to suffer from this, and not the children of the rich who have taken these decisions to do it. So I think trade unionism and the organised working class need to...
Steve, could you lift your microphone?
I think the trade unionists and the organised working class need to do what we can to support the direct action movement, to educate our workers, our members, in order to take action where possible to stop this, and to basically say we've had enough. I mean, we as workers are at the sharp end of all these attacks, all these projects, and we're being asked specifically as transport workers to accept redundancies and massive redundancies, cuts in services, and this crazy project, which is an absolute waste of money, is being foisted upon us, and in my community in particular. And I would just like to end on this. I think Rosa Luxemburg, the fantastic socialist who was murdered by the equivalent of a Labour Party, the SDP in Germany, she said it was either socialism or barbarism, and I think it's gone beyond that now. What we're going to either have is a socialist economy, a planned economy, a green economy that looks after not just this country but the whole planet, or we're going to have extinction. So we're either going to have socialism or extinction. And I think working class people will be need to be leading this fight, because ultimately it's our lives, it's our children, it's our children's children that are going to suffer if we don't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So thank you, Steve. Next in this section, trade union organisation, which has been a very active part of our campaign, the National Education Union, Newham, is represented here by Liam O'Hanrahan. He's been able to come here and join us at Waterloo. Liam, please come up and tell us why and how Newham NEU have become active in this campaign, and what you hope will happen from here onwards in terms of trade union and workplace action. Thanks.
Thanks, Simon. So the reason the National Education Union, the NEU, has become involved in this campaign is because of the unique position and unique responsibilities that we have as educators with regards to this issue. It's not just that schools and teachers are really at the heart of local communities. It's that one of the biggest changes in education over the last decade has been the real growth in the responsibilities towards safeguarding that educators have taken on. And that means that we're responsible for the safety of children, not just in school, but actually in their whole lives. And that covers everything from their emotional health, but also their physical health. And I don't see how we can take that seriously, that safeguarding seriously, if we don't take seriously the consequences of air pollution for children. It affects everybody, of course, but children are particularly vulnerable. You know, the studies are there that prove the links between air pollution and low birth rates, premature birth, the effect on lung growth, which is stunted by air pollution, even the links between a lower educational attainment and air pollution and developmental delay. So if we take this safeguarding seriously, I really don't see how we can't take air pollution seriously. And obviously as teachers, we're in that unique position in our communities where we can speak and be listened to in a very important way. Thank you. Okay, so in terms of how we build this campaign and how we act on this issue, essentially it's been two strands so far. We've been trying to raise awareness in communities, and we've been trying to put pressure on local leaders, on local politicians. And we've been doing it and trying to bring those two strands together when we can. We've been organising rallies and leafleting campaigns, which have been really well received. Once people know about this issue and they understand what's involved, the reaction is extremely positive. And I think that just shows how much we can achieve with raising awareness as part of our strategy and campaign. And we've also, of course, had protests outside the mayor's office. And we've also been lobbying local councillors and the local mayor on this issue. That's where we are at the moment. We really want to use today to plan and develop where we then take this next. And obviously, I'm looking forward to everyone being involved in that. That's all I wanted to say really for now. Thank you. Yeah. Cheers. All right.
Right. Okay. Health, schools and community. We're talking about now. This has already come up. We've got three speakers, two online, and Jackie Applebee, who's here with us. Let's start with the people online. First of all, Delia Mattis of Black Lives Matter and the Edmonton Incinerator campaign. Delia's out there somewhere in cyberspace. Hi, Delia, please tell us about the experience of organising Black Lives Matter in London, and specifically give us your view on how, and again, this point's already been touched on, how struggles around racism and campaigns on environmental issues like the tunnel project can relate to each other. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. That's a big question. So organising Black Lives Matter in London, it's difficult. It's difficult because the issues are difficult. Racism is not a nice thing. It's an awful thing that our communities are inflicted with. And now, finally, because since the uprising, the BLM uprising, we are being really vocal about how those issues affect us in our communities, and we're being really honest about it. We talk about police racism and police brutality. We talk about racism in our education system, where Black children are disproportionately, permanently excluded from schools, and how that leads to the school to prison pipeline. We talk about the disproportionate issues with health and our racism in our healthcare impacts on our communities. And these are really difficult issues that some people don't want to know about. But the reality is a lot of people do want to know about. And in the movement, in the BLM movement, one of the greatest things that we have been building is allyship in the true sense of the word. It's having people who have privilege that use it to shield those of us who don't have it. It's having people who are prepared to march on the streets with us against the issues of racism. And it's a really powerful movement that I think people thought it was going to go away, but we're just getting started. In terms of the campaign in Edmonton for the incinerator, the campaign had already started. It was led by Stop the Edmonton Incinerator Now campaign, largely XR people, but some people not in that as well. And then after quite a long time of it existing, Black Lives Matter got involved in the campaign. I don't think I need to go over the issues because they've been raised so much in this meeting. Edmonton is 30%, over 30% Black, over 60% Black, brown, or another racial or ethnic group. And actually, please note that I'm not using the term BAME or BME. I think it's important that we call people what we are. We don't want to be lumbered together. We're not one homogenous group of people. That doesn't exist. So if you're talking about Black and brown communities or another racial or ethnic group, just say that we're people. We're not a term to be banded together in that way. Okay, take the issues seriously, and you can start with getting rid of the term BAME. So disproportionately, we're affected by air pollution in a place like Edmonton. And the campaign has changed since we've got involved. Last year, in December, we marched down the North Circular, as Raj so powerfully said earlier on. We marched down the North Circular, about 200 of us, and blocked it. And when people see those kind of actions, those kind of, militant actions going on in local communities, more and more people want to get involved, and that's what's happened. Organising in our communities is really, really difficult because we are the communities that are affected every day by systemic injustices. So it's hard. When people say, oh, well, we didn't see a lot of Black people there, don't have that attitude. If you've got that attitude, you're not an ally and you're not listening. If you're listening, you will know that we are so affected in our communities by these systemic issues that we don't have the capacity a lot of the time to join in these actions. But what's happening locally, when I go to meetings in my community, everybody's talking about the incinerator. Everybody's talking about climate justice. And so the word is getting through. I'll see your sign, thank you very much. So the word is getting through. It's getting through to the point of this. Last Sunday, we had an amazing action in Edmonton, the biggest one that we've ever had in Edmonton. And the locals came out and they were mesmerized by what was going on, mesmerized. And what blew my mind was the kids, 7-year-old boy, he just couldn't get over what was going on. It was completely blown away. And he said he will never forget this day. So that's how much we're getting through to communities. We've done everything though. We leafleted the community. That's something that you need to start doing. If you want to engage the community, get in there, give them the information, raise some money, get some leaflets, go out there, knock them doors, just like you do for a political party. Do it for the community. It's very, very important. I'm going to end on Sadiq Khan because a lot of people are saying very positive things about him, and I don't have positive things to say about Sadiq Khan. As far as I'm concerned, he has failed my community. He had the opportunity to speak out against the incinerator and he chose not to do it. He's failed us and he's failed my community, and the Labour Party has failed us as well. I cannot go to my community with any confidence and say back the Labour Party. I'm doing the opposite. Anybody who backs my community will get our support. We're no longer going to support, because we're not cult. We're not going to support political parties that don't support us. Why don't we just start voting in our own interest? The only way we're going to change politics in this country is when we start doing that. Vote in your own interest. We're going to lose the planet soon. So we better start thinking politically, and we might want to start supporting independent candidates. Listen, solidarity, everybody. It's great to be here.
Right, moving on quickly. Thank you very much, Delia. Now, hopefully, we've got Megan Rose on line from the Stop the Cambo oil field campaign in Scotland. Megan, if you're there, please tell us about the experience of organising against the Cambo oil field project, and particularly, how did you deal with the greenwash?
Thanks, Simon. So organising with the Stop Cambo campaign has been phenomenal so far. It's a really dynamic coalition of multiple NGOs and individuals that are extremely enthusiastic about stopping oil and future fossil fuel projects. So for those that don't know, Cambo is an oil field that's been proposed about 70 miles northwest of Shetland. It's one of 40 fossil fuel projects that are coming up for permission for exploration. It got a license for exploration back in 2001. So we've been trying to fight it. And we've obviously had to deal with a lot of greenwash because one of the main funders for Cambo oil field has been Shell. And when you're fighting a corporation that's that massive and has that much money, you really need to combat greenwashing from as many angles as possible. So we've tried to make our actions as accessible as we can. A lot of them are online, so we can get more members participating. We've had blogs and Instagram posts, Twitter storms, phone jamming, massive petitions, a really big MP push as well, which is targeting the UK government's greenwashing instead of Shell's greenwashing. And then to supplement that, we've also had a lot of direct action going on. So with Shell specifically, just before COP26 happened, they were invited to speak at TED Connect, a conference in Edinburgh, about why oil companies deserve to be part of the transition to renewables. This obviously was not okay. There was no reason that should be allowed to go ahead. So we managed to get one of our Stop Cambo activists on stage, the wonderful Lauren McDonald. She was fantastic, and she was able to challenge the Shell CEO on stage in front of an audience. We had it on video, it got spread a lot, and that was a really good way of showing a direct combating greenwashing that way. We've also had a lot of interruptions and challenges to politicians because the UK government has also been doing a lot of greenwashing. A lot of that comes across trying to find these politicians when they're not expecting it, challenging them, asking these questions and trying to record a response to show that they know what they're doing is wrong, they need to change. And if you can show those challenges and get them shared widely, it's going to do a lot more. Alex, I can share that video at some point. I don't have the link on me right at this moment, sorry. We've got a lot more greenwashing coming up as well to combat, which is going to be lots of fun to do. The most recent one is the UK government is currently trying to push through a climate compatibility checkpoint for future fossil fuels to prove that some fossil projects are somehow compatible with the current climate crisis. I don't know how they can think that any of them can fit in with that, but rest assured, this is something that Cambo Campaign is focusing on massively. We're creating a handbook that's going to be downloadable that anyone can access to find out how they themselves can help combat it. It is currently an ongoing consultation. It's ending on the 28th of February. So we're going to try and get as many inputs into that consultation as possible and try and get as many politicians on our side as well, going through a really effective MP working group that is doing a lot to contact every single MP and MSP in Scotland and get them on our side. And we've had a lot of success with that. We've had politicians and parties speak out against Cambo from every single party, pretty much. We've even had one Conservative MP come out against Cambo, and we hope to get more as we continue. But overall, for combating greenwashing, it's just every angle you can. These companies and these governments are not going to spare any expense in greenwashing what they're trying to do. So you need to attack them from as many angles as you possibly can. And that's what we're doing, and we're happy to help in any way we can with Silvertown as well. We've got some training sessions coming up too, if anyone wants to get involved in those, specifically aimed at accessible actions, just transition, how to be a good spokesperson on these issues and how to do public speaking well. So they're coming up in the first couple of weeks of February, and we're hoping to continue those training sessions going on. And while they will be specifically aimed at Stop Cambo. We're hoping to get more people involved and spread it wider as well to help as many campaigns as possible. Thanks for the little half-minute saying. I think I don't have many more, but just remember that even though Cambo has been paused, it's not being stopped. We still need to stop it. And even if we do stop it, there's still 39 more projects coming through that are due to be licensed by 2025. So we can't stop now, and we need to attack it as much as we can. Thanks for inviting me here to speak.
And finally, in this section, Jackie Applebee, I'm hoping she's here. This is you. Hello, Jackie. Jackie is in Doctors in the Unite Union, and she's chair of the Tower Hamlets Local Medical Committee, and she's a GP. Jackie, please tell us about the way that doctors have organised on health and air pollution issues in the past, and how we could involve you more widely in our campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm Jackie, I'm a GP in Tower Hamlets, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've done, obviously campaigning, but you know, Tower Hamlets is right next to Newham, and it's one of the most deprived boroughs in the country. People have already alluded to the health effects of air pollution, but kids in Tower Hamlets, their lungs are 10% smaller than kids in more affluent parts of the country who don't have pollution. That's you know, that's damning. That's children in my borough. And if you talk about the health effects of climate change as well, there are obviously things like heat stroke and so on, and vector-borne diseases. There are so many things. So when I heard earlier that Cttee is thinking that, you know, it's going to cost too much to cancel this project, why don't they ever think about the costs of health, you know, of ill health? Why don't they ever think about the costs of deprivation? So anyway, so we've organised as doctors, and I think we can organise as doctors, but I don't think we should be elite. We're all part of the same movement. I think sometimes having doctors highlighting a health issue can be quite powerful, but I also think it's really important that we don't campaign in silos. So I think it's really important that we build the mass movement, and that we're part of that, and that we all work together, because we've all got different strengths. And I think if we're going to beat this thing, we have to come together. We have to build a mass movement on the streets. So what have we done? So we've written to Jon Burke, who's the mayor of Tower Hamlets, because when we heard about the Silvertown tunnel, we thought, well, the mayor of Tower Hamlets would surely be against this. You know, I mean, it's going to be coming in very close. And as I've said, you know, children in his borough have got the lungs are 10% smaller. But so we wrote to him and asked him if he would join us, and about 30 doctors, I think, signed the letter locally from Tower Hamlets and the Royal London to say, would he join us in writing to Sadiq Khan and complaining and being against the Silvertown tunnel? But no, of course not. He wasn't prepared to do that. He said his argument was, well, there'll be electric cars soon, and that won't matter, as if electricity comes from, you know, I mean, obviously it's great if it comes from wind farms and solar panels and blah, 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 but it doesn't. Does it mainly? It comes from gas at the moment and fossil fuels. And also he doesn't seem to think that brake dust was a problem. So we've done that. We've also, and we got a lot of publicity from that, actually. And in fact, the Guardian took that up. So that was a good thing. We did that. And we've also, on Days of Action, we've protested as health centres. We've protested in the middle of Mile End Road, down on the Limehouse, on the Limehouse Junction up in Whitechapel, with banners sort of talking about the health effects of climate change. But we've also, very importantly, joined in with other local actions. So I think the 29th of September, before COVID, and we've really got to get back out on the streets because COVID has really stopped that. But we joined with the student movement, and there was the Student Day of Action, and we had a fantastic demonstration where we marched all the way from Mile End down to Whitechapel. We blocked the road in Whitechapel. I can't remember how many. There were hundreds of us there. We blocked the road in Whitechapel for at least half an hour, I would say. Then we walked down, marched down to something called Altar Valley Park, which is where we've been talking about Black Lives Matter and about racism, where a young Bangladeshi man was murdered by racist thugs in the 70s. Past East London Mosque, people from East London Mosque joined us. And again, being out there, being visible is so important because it will bring people in. We then marched up to Bethnal Green and we blocked the road in Bethnal Green. And then students from local schools came and joined us after school. So I think it's really important to do those sorts of things. We've had banner drops and so on and so forth. And I think it's important to remember that if you get out there on the streets and you campaign, you know, you can win. If you don't get out there, you can't win. And we had a very successful Save Our Surgeries campaign about 7 or 8 years ago, where we actually sort of but made sure that money that was going to be taken out of the health service locally was actually kept in there. So I'd like to finish really by saying, as I've come here today, I'm very, very delighted to be involved in this campaign. I suppose can't always come to all the meetings, but please use me as a conduit. And what I'd like to suggest is that those of us who signed the letter to John Biggs take a similar letter to Sadiq Khan, and we have a high publicity event in the week of action. We'll have to find out the best day for everybody, but it shouldn't just be for doctors. We can turn up in our scrubs and we can make it a good photo, but I think it should be for everybody. We could also do something down in Canning Town by the entrance to the works again in that week, and I've got commitment from a number of my colleagues to do that. So thank you very much. We really need to keep going, and I don't think we can stop the tunnel. It would be ideal if we stopped it before they start, but we should keep going if we don't. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jackie, and especially for the very, very practical proposals. I'm looking at the time. If somebody's got something important they want to, or pressing they want to ask, let's ask it, and then we've got 2 more speakers. And then we'll break out into groups. On direct action, we have 2 people to speak to us. Angie Peterson is here, but first we're going to have, hopefully online, Raj Chada, known to many of you already. He's a solicitor at Hodge Jones Allen, a human rights lawyer. This is a challenge for 4 minutes, but there we go, that's life. Raj, please tell us the legal position for protesters seeking to take direct action against a project such as the Silvertown Tunnel, and in particular, the implications of the police crime sentencing and courts bill. Thanks.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an absolute privilege to have represented many people who've been campaigning against the Silvertown Tunnel, as well as more general environmental protesters. Just want to start, before we get into the current position and the new bill, about the importance of protest, because otherwise we lose sight of what we're doing. And there are 3 broad quotes from Supreme Court cases which highlight that. They say that protest is the lifeblood of democracy, that it is the proper functioning of a democracy, and that it is essential for the discovery of truth. So the current government that is setting out the police bill, and that says that these protests are anti-democratic, are absolutely talking rubbish. Protests, be it from the suffragette movement, the anti-apartheid movement, XR, these are the protests that help change policy. And no doubt that's what you will seek to do in Silvertown, and I hope be successful. The current position on protest is in many ways highlighted by a case that went to the Supreme Court last year, the case of Ziegler that many of you will be familiar with. And in broad terms, what that court case indicated was that protests, even when they are disruptive, can be protected under Article 10 and 11 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which can mean that you get a defense to any criminal charge, or to certain criminal charges that are brought against you. Now, it is not a get out of jail free card in that loosest sense for any protester that excuses any criminal liability. It is absolutely not that. But what it is, and it's hugely important, it says that, let's just say, because Ziegler was about obstruction of the highway, that in previous cases, they said a road was really for vehicles primarily to pass and repass. That was its primary purpose. And what Ziegler said was, that's not right. We are all citizens, and we can use public spaces to protest as well. So you must balance, a court must balance your right to protest against the rights of others to use the highway or any other rights that they may have. And so what it becomes is, rather than a hard and fast rule, is it's a balancing exercise between your right to protest and the rights of others that may be impacted by your protest. And just looking as I look to the other screen, the court listed a number of factors that's worth bearing in mind for protesters. They said it was about the importance of the precise location, the extent to which the protest was targeted, the duration of the protest, if it's a highway case, the extent to which it was obstructed, the extent of the actual interference with others, most importantly, whether or not it gave rise to any form of disorder, whether the protest related to very important issues. Those are all really important factors to bear in mind when you're planning any sort of protest or any sort of action. The difficulty with the police bill is that it really drives a coach and horses through those sorts of protections, or seeks to. It will be easier for the police to impose conditions on demonstrations. The idea that protests may cause serious annoyance may lead to really lengthy prison sentences. And this bill is not about law and order. It is not about state control in terms of law and order. It is about state control of your voice and the erosion of our rights. The last thing, because just listening to the speakers just before I finish, is that this has to be a unified campaign between those that are fighting in the courts, those that are fighting in the trade unions, and those that are fighting by protest, and also directly in the courts. Wasn't me, but one of my colleagues took the Deborah Kisser case about air pollution being the cause of death for a young girl. And I find it astonishing that despite that case, public policy remains the same. And what they should have done once that case had been determined was to reevaluate all public policy to see how, if a court has determined that we are killing our children because of air pollution, then public policy has to change. And we will need to use the courts to fight that. And that's it for me.
Thanks very much, Raj. That gives us a lot to think about. Right, last speaker, Angie Peterson is a Plumstead resident, and she's been researching the campaign in the 1990s about Oxley's Woods, through which they were planning to drive a great big road, and that campaign stopped that from happening. So Angie, welcome. You've researched this history of that campaign. How did it succeed?
Thanks, Simon. The campaign that began in 1981 was focused on saving the ancient woodland rather than just saying no to a road. Saving the woods would also save the homes in Plumstead and protect the community from traffic noise and pollution. The river crossing was part of the Ringway 2 orbital road that became a strategic trunk road and was considered vital to the regeneration of the Docklands. The scheme was supported by the London Docklands Corporation and the Borough of Newham and the British Road Federation. A campaign group originally called Plumstead Against the River Crossing soon renamed themselves People Against the River Crossing due to the road scheme attracting a wider opposition. A public inquiry took place from September 85 to December 96. At the time, it was the longest road inquiry ever held. Meanwhile, the short takeoff and landing airport of the Royal Docks, which opened in 1987, proved very successful, and soon the Docklands Corporation wanted to increase capacity and allow bigger, noisier jets to take off, despite an assurance that the development would be controlled to minimise disturbance for local residents. However, the suspension bridge designs would adversely affect the approach of bigger aircraft should the expansion plans be approved. the bridge would not be allowed to be lowered because it needed to allow tall ships to travel upstream to Greenwich and beyond. So the government altered the bridge design to an unimpressive box girder style, and public consultation resulted in 7,500 more objections. So another public inquiry was held in July 1990, and this time they combined it with the airport expansion proposals. The Department of Transport said that the LRIC was a done deal and that the inquiry was merely to consult on the design of the bridge. Oh, and by the way, it would now need to be 6 lanes wide. So 9 members of PARC went to the High Court to challenge the inadequate land exchange for the woods. They lost the case and decided to appeal, as well as to ask the European Commission to challenge the government for failing to carry out a proper environmental impact assessment on the road scheme, which was an EC directive. Meanwhile, in Hampshire, the missing link for the M3 motorway was going to be built over Twyford Down. Campaigners there had also lost a High Court battle and had lodged a complaint with the EC. The government ignored the EC's order not to start work, and construction began on Twyford Down. The campaigners sadly accepted defeat, but many anti-road protesters had occupied the Down, and regular reinforcements travelled there to hamper construction work through non-violent direct action. Arrests and injunctions did not deter the protesters, and media was awash with images and stories of a brutal war against the road builders. The press reported that this was a summer of discontent and that the campaigner suggested that large protests would take place at Oxley's Woods. In April 93, the EC confirmed that they would take the government to court over their failure to conduct a proper environmental impact assessment on many projects at that time. In May 93, the local campaigners announced that they had formed an alliance with national organisations and were appealing for people to sign a pledge to beat the bulldozers should the bulldozers arrive at Oxley's Woods. Campaigners made sure that the Department of Transport were aware that 3,500 pledges had been signed so far. TV crews and press would be an easy reach to report on the planned summer protests. The government's ally, the British Road Federation, suddenly removed their support for the scheme. At the beginning of July 93, in a confidential correspondence to the Prime Minister, the Transport Minister wrote he would not proceed with current plans for the East London River crossing because the protest against the scheme had been gathering pace, the European Court of Justice would force a 2-year delay, and the government's environmental standards had changed since the 1980s. I am so thankful for the dedication of the campaigners who fought a 12-year battle against the government. The rising mass of public opposition, combined with the scenes at Twyford Down, undoubtedly helped to convince the government that the people against the river crossing would not stop to save Plumstead and Oxley's. Thank you.
Just the other thing I wanted to do is just quickly go back to the point that Raj raised about the how campaigns like this, which are essentially about community and air pollution on one hand and climate on the other, can mesh more closely with what the public transport workers are doing. I mean, I think there's a really, and I think you mentioned sometimes it's hard to kind of, you know, what's the relevance? How do these things click together? I think in this case, they click together extremely directly and very well, because the alternative to building roads is to invest in public transport. And actually what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 months, I mean, there's this constant battle going on between the government and the mayor about funding TfL. And obviously we are not party to those discussions. We don't know how that all works out. We have made the point that while, as Sian said this morning, it's the mayor's decision. I mean, Grant Shapps could bring this thing to an end tomorrow by just phoning up Sadiq Khan and saying, okay, let's work out the cancellation costs. So, I mean, the government is equally responsible. But the point is they're juggling all the time about what items are we going to spend money on and what items are we not going to spend money on. That's a conversation they're having between the mayor and the government. And the alternative to a road-centered policy is to invest in public transport, as well as in walking and in cycling and so on and so on. So public transport workers have everything to gain by working with ourselves, working with environmentalist groups for a city where there's more public transport, which is better for them. You know, none of this kind of night shift working at these ridiculous low rates of pay. We don't think anybody, we completely support, you know, their fight for, as you said, a livable wage, but that also goes along with a livable city where we kind of look beyond a city where we all sit in traffic jams the whole time, which means, you know, where's the Beekaloo line extension? It's been delayed. Where's the DLR going to Thamesmead? It's been delayed. Where's Crossrail 2? Not even thinking about it. All these, and in fact, if you look back at the Mayor's transport strategy of 2017, it's got a mention of the Silvertown tunnel, and it's got a mention of all these public transport projects. And actually, none of these things have gone ahead. And now we're hearing about cuts in bus services, cuts in this, cuts in that, at a time when ideally we should be saying, I mean, and the other thing is they're going to make, one of the advantages of being my age is that, right? You get around for nothing. And now they're going to make people wait longer and longer and longer for that. Whereas in fact, they should be giving them out to everybody. And that's not a, I do have utopian ideas, but actually that is not a utopian idea in the least. That's what they're discussing in Scotland. That's what they're testing out in Glasgow. So, you know, there's an absolute link between the public transport issue and this, which is not only just a general thing that the workers' movement and the environmentalist movement go side by side, but in this case, a very, very direct. Okay, that's from me. Anybody else? Yeah. Sorry, just the last word is thank you from us all to this fabulous Waterloo Action Centre. They've been so helpful. We've come here, we've tested the equipment. I mean, the caretaker's not here, he won't hear this, but I'll put it in a letter to them. They've been great. And guess what? They're under threat of closure by Lambeth Council. It's one of the last proper community centres in London, as you can see, as you've seen today. So yeah, what a fabulous place. Let's bear in mind their campaign and do all we can to support them. Okay, thanks everybody online. Thanks everybody. Tea's over there. No rush to leave.